Hello, London. Hi, and welcome to the Hello World Show. I'm Spencer Schneidenbach.
I'm Heather Downing.
And we are thrilled today to bring you the very first Hello World Show live here on stage at NDC London.
Maybe many of you have never heard of the Hello World Show. We're kind of a new YouTube channel that interviews different masters of the craft in 10 minutes or less to give us a nugget of information in a visual format for the visual learners out there in us.
That's right. And you can find us at the.hw.show. That'll take you to our YouTube page where you can see we've got about 20 or so interviews so far.
Yeah, about 20, and we're about to have quite a few more for this year. We did a whole bunch of interviews yesterday.
Yes, that was awesome.
Yes, and if you want to follow the conversation on Twitter, you can follow us at the HW Show. Or if you like to try to pronounce difficult names, you can follow at Coraline, that's me, and at Schneidenbach.
That's right, and they're up on the screen if you need to know how to spell them, because I certainly couldn't if I were sitting where you were.
Right.
All right. So, Heather, why did we choose to do a live show?
Well, we actually talked about this last time we were at an NDC. We started our very first show at NDC Oslo. So NDC is near and dear to our hearts. Yeah. And we also wanted to bring you guys into the conversation. It was about time. We get to ask all the questions of these masters, but I'm sure you have even better ones. So we decided to give you a chance in a live setting to send each one of our panelists questions. Go to questions.hw.show. We'll moderate them and take a look at them and see if there's anything we want to ask.
Try to minimize your use of the F word. All right, so without further ado, I'd like to start by introducing our panelists. First one, he is a Pluralsight author, a consultant, and a cybersecurity specialist, and recently testified in front of the United States Congress about the importance of cybersecurity. Please welcome Troy Hunt.
All right. Well, next I'd like to introduce you to the recent recipient of the Techinista Inspirator Award in the Netherlands, a college professor, someone who runs her own podcast and is on the board of the Joy of Coding Conference. Please welcome Felienne.
Next, we have a gentleman who works for Google on the Google Cloud Developer team, making .NET tools for the GCM platform. One of the most knowledgeable people in the world on C# and crowned king of Stack Overflow, with recently just surpassed 1 million points. Please welcome John Skeet.
Last, I want to introduce to you somebody who inspired my own talk on imposter syndrome. A well-known blogger, a celebrated teacher. Really, is there any more introduction? Please welcome Scott Hanselman.
All right. So we'll start with our presentation is going to go in this order, from Troy down to Scott. And we're going to start, of course, with Troy Hunt, who's going to teach us something today in roughly 8 minutes or less. Something about credential stuffing. Surprise, surprise, something security related. So, come on up, Troy. All right.
All right, so we're going to spend the first 8 minutes trying to make the projector work. Okay, so I have actually spent, I think, about 45 minutes so far at NDC trying to make projectors work. So, if this works, it will be a miracle. Who's just... While I'm doing this, who's been on Have I Been Pwned? Like, who has literally been pwned on Have I Been Pwned? Okay, so everyone with their hands down doesn't know they've been pwned, but they have been pwned, and we're going to talk about why that happens.
Can we switch to the projector, please?
Yeah.
Or the computer view?
Yeah,
There we go.
Oh, look. Oh, that's my other screen. Hang on, let's do this. Let's do duplicate. All right, cool. Wow, that's amazing. It worked. I'm pretty stoked. I don't know what to do now, actually. I didn't think it would work. No, don't worry. All right, so I'll say a little bit of context, because we're going to talk about credential stuffing, but I want to talk about the things that lead to that. Literally 10 minutes ago, I got an email from someone, and I've taken their name out of it, but I'm going to show you how this conversation went, because it explains the problem beautifully. So someone got in touch with me, and they said this. And I get a lot of these. It's like, I found someone else logged into my account on another thing. That must mean they were hacked. And this is sort of what the guy's saying. He's like, all right, well, yeah, Steam must have been compromised because someone's logged into my account. So I go back to the guy and I go, by any chance, might you have reused your username and password anywhere else? And what do you reckon he said? It's like, this is the least unsurprising thing ever. Least surprising thing ever. So he's like, yeah, actually, I use it in other places. So, like, we know that this happens. We know that humans do this. We know you've all done that. I've done this with, dirty pass, etc., etc. So people do this. And then what happens is bad guys create massive aggregated lists from data breaches. So when you look at something like Have I Been Pwned, and we say, yeah, there's like 4.8 billion accounts in there, people go through and they collect these and they create all these unique lists of email address and password pairs. Now, last month there was a whole bit in the news about 1.4 billion passwords or something like that. This will find it. Where this came out in the news. And what this was is someone had collated this one list that literally had 1.4 billion email address password pairs. I had multiple instances of my email address in there and various passwords that have been cracked from different systems, some really embarrassingly old ones as well. Most of you are almost certainly in this list. And it wasn't new stuff, it's like old stuff. But someone has just gone to the effort of going around and collating it all, putting it all together in one list. So then you go, okay, well, what happens now when you have like 1.4 billion potential credential pairs? Well, they go to your other systems and they try to log into them. So they use various free online tools that will automate the process of taking those credentials and just spamming them at other systems. And they'll use things like open proxies, so they come from different IP address. They're like heaps and heaps of proxies on the web where you can say, I want to route my connection through there. So think about it for you guys. Like if you're running a system and you're seeing lots of requests from different IP addresses, different user agents, trying to log into different accounts and the credentials are correct, how do you stop that? Like that's actually a really, really hard problem. And this is what credential stuffing is. It's just like, let's take masses of things and blast them automatically at some system that we'll try and authenticate to. So here's one way of trying to protect against that. In Have I Been Pwned, don't you love those? No, go away. In Have I Been Pwned, last year I put out what I called pwned passwords. And what this is it's 320 million individual passwords, unique passwords, that have appeared in data breaches over the years. And what you can do is you can download the lot of them. They're all SHA-1 hashes because some of them have got personal identifiable info. So people actually do things like use their email address as their password. And if the system doesn't allow that, they just make the first letter uppercase and then they're fine. So I didn't want to put them out there as plain text. They're all SHA-1 hashes. But you can go down and you can grab these SHA-1 hashes from here. There's a few different files there because I had some additions as I went along. Download them all, put them in your system somewhere, and then when someone comes to register or change their password or even log in, you can say, okay, I'm going to take that password, SHA-1 hash it, is it in the list? And if it's in the list, you know it's a crap password. So either it has already been used in another system by the same person and it's been breached, and it's effectively like the guy in the message just before, or just by like pure magical coincidence, someone else generated the same cryptographically random password. That probably didn't happen, right? So it's like someone else has children with the same name or a mother's maiden name that's the same. So you know they're crap. And then you can do things like either say, look, you just can't use it because it's terrible, or maybe you shouldn't use it and give them the option to change it, or maybe even just flag the account. So this is a really cool way of trying to protect against credential stuffing that's pretty easily accessible, and it's free. You can just go and download all these. I think I'm running pretty well on time, and I want to sort of take lots of questions because I know people are really curious about how all this stuff works. So can we throw to the questions?
Absolutely. Let's start with our panelists. Do you guys have any?
I had one a minute ago and I can't remember it now.
My question for the panelists is, have any of you ever been on Have I Been Owned? Have I Been Pwned? Have you put your email address in and found something there?
Yeah, I was. I'm not afraid to admit it.
I did what you're not supposed to do. I went to the pwned passwords, and it says right there, don't put in your real password. So, of course, the first thing I did was try every password that I have. Thankfully, only one, though. Any questions from the audience?
We have several. The first one is, Troy, why is a password manager better? Is it not a single point of failure?
It is a single point of failure. And if someone gets into there, you're screwed. But, let's not sugarcoat it, right? But, what we're doing here is you've got to sort of compare different states. So one of the things that I find people get very uppity about with security is they go, oh, that thing's not perfect, it's no good. And we're sort of going, well, hang on a second, let's be pragmatic about this. And a little while ago, I wrote something that was, password managers, that'll find it, about password managers don't have to be perfect, they just have to be better than not having one. And in fact, in here, has anyone seen these password books you can buy? So I'll scroll down and show you what they look like. There's a picture here. One of these, right? And I'll have people tweet me and go, hey, Troy, I saw this thing on Amazon, and it's a password book, and you write your password in there, and it's not even encrypted. It's like, that's because it's paper. Of course it's not encrypted. But they're pointing me at this, saying, look how shit this is. And I'm going, well, hang on a second, let's take a step back, and this speaks to the broader password management thing. Imagine, let's say you've got non-technical elderly parents, as an example, and they're using the same crap password everywhere because that's what they do. And you go home one day and you go, hey, Mum and Dad, I'll give you a password book. And they go through and they change every password to something unique. And they write it down there and they put it in their drawer. The fundamentals of their risk profile just completely changes. All the credential stuff we just spoke about goes away because they're not using the same password everywhere. Their threat actor, so the person they have to worry about breaking into their things, is someone who can break into their house and steal something. And by that time, I'm normally more worried about my TV than I am like a notebook, right? So the first thing is that you've got to sort of compare apples and apples. The password manager premise is put all your eggs in one basket, and it's just a really, really secure basket you look after really, really carefully. And if you use a good password manager like 1Password or LastPass and you have a really solid master password and you use it the way it's meant to be used, your chances of anything going wrong are really, 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 really tiny, small. If they do, you're massively screwed, but it's very unlikely. Next question.
What do you think is the best way to get reports out to customers in a breach now that it has happened?
That was an interesting word because that said out to customers of a breach. If it's a customer, you've got a relationship, right? So I would assume that you can sort of say, hey, you know how we built that thing for you? Actually, that might get quite uncomfortable. It's like, we built this thing for you, then a funny thing happened the other day. But at least you have a relationship there. Normally the question is, how do I notify some entity that I don't have an existing relationship with of a data breach? And that's really hard. I wrote about this actually just earlier on the week, and I spoke about how I'm doing data breach disclosure, and I wrote this sort of step-by-step process. It can be enormously painful, to be completely honest. I go round and round and round trying to notify organisations that they've got data floating around. And in this blog post from Monday, I actually wrote about my attempts to let 3 different companies know about exposed data. One of them had a heap of credit cards exposed. Now, they're going to have other issues with the likes of PCI, but I filled out the contact form and I DM'd them on Twitter and I notified them on Facebook and I put a public tweet. Just couldn't get through to them. So frankly, sometimes it's really hard, but have a read of this if you're looking for ideas of how do I actually get in touch with the company.
All right, next question. Troy, where do you get the pwned data from?
Where do I get the pwned data from? Most of the time, people are sending it to me. And this is sort of I don't want to say it's nice, but it's the nice thing about running Have I Been Pwned now. There's so many people that support it. There's literally like minions of people out there looking for this sort of stuff. And I find that pretty much every day someone pops up and says, hey, here's data. I've found it here or there or somewhere else. Part of the scary thing is just how much is floating around. And if I give you an example, who's done a Google Doc before? Oh man, here goes your weekend. This is good fun. So Google Docs find things on the internet that aren't really meant to be found. And just in case you want to find more Google Docs, you can go to ExploitDB. And ExploitDB has a Google hacking database. And you can do stuff like say, I would like to find files containing passwords. What are search criteria that find files containing passwords? And here we have under that title column a whole bunch of searches you can do. So you could say, what about, Trello.com, passwords. No one would put passwords on Trello, would they? Dead silence. So you could go there, and now we're doing a Google search for the word password on Trello. And a bunch of them will be real passwords. The exposed data, if we look at something like, say, index of and then .sql.gzip, I've done this before, suddenly you realise how many databases are just literally backed up to the internet and sat in directories with directory listing enabled, and you can just go down and find .sql.gzips. And it's just insane how many there are. And it's not that I want to show you where to find data breaches on something we're recording, right? But there are results even on this screen, which are just massive lists of files that you can go and download them. To answer the initial question, people find these things and then they go, hey, Troy, I noticed this breach with 1 million credentials is out there and it's not on Have I Been Pwned? Here you go.
Thank you so much for joining us. Troy Hunt, everyone.
Awesome. Next up, we have Felienne, and she's going to draw on the whiteboard for us. So everybody can give her a warm round of applause.
Hello, everyone. When Heather asked me what I wanted to talk about, I said I want to talk about teaching. So I want to talk to you about teaching. And even though I know most of you probably aren't teachers, I'm sure lots of you do a lot of teaching, explaining stuff to people in your team, to juniors. So I want to talk about how you actually explain stuff. So assume you're in this scenario. You are the big senior, the team lead. You are someone who knows things. It makes you happy. You have a junior on your team, tiny person, still a bit confused about many things, and you're going to explain this person something very complicated that I will represent as zeros and ones, because that's super complicated coding stuff. So the junior, he's just listening, or she's just listening, because you are this oracle of wisdom. You're like nodding and smiling and saying, yes, 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 no, I get it, it's all good. So this conversation ends. You are done with explaining. And I want to talk to you about what you say if you're done explaining something to someone. So this person has been silent for a while, and now it's your turn again. What goes here? I want to talk about that. And we're in a room with a lot of programmers, so it's very hard to come up with a good programming example that's understandable, but just outside of your reach. So I'm going to use my favorite metaphor of programming as natural language and teach you a little bit of Dutch in order for you to be in this I'm learning something mode so that you can appreciate how hard it is to learn something. Who in the audience speaks Dutch? I know there are a few. Yeah, so this will be less informative for you. However, it will be more fun because on the flip side, you have a comprehensible language. So that's a win for the Dutch people. So let me teach you some Dutch pronunciation. As I said in my keynote, if we have letters, then they're always representing the same sound. So O and E is oe, very much as you would have in boek. We have more of these letter combinations. We also have E and I together. They're I, a little bit like it would be in your my. Also, by the way, this means egg. Important fact. We have other letter combinations, like you and I together, it's I. It doesn't really have any equivalent in your language, so I'm just going to say I, because that's how it sounds to me. Also, that means onion. So this was my explanation. Let's talk about how I could close off this explanation to start communicating with you junior Dutch speakers. So one of the things I could say is, did you get it? Did you understand? Yeah? Anyone? Did you understood it? John? Yeah, okay. So I know there's lots of people that end their explanation, did you get it? I do that sometimes as well. But what does it mean, did you get it? What can you now do? Probably, maybe you can repeat this, but could you apply it in a different context? Could you now pronounce this word? You said you got it, so can you pronounce this for me?
Why?
Nah, try. Close. So, did you get it? It doesn't really mean anything. If I ask this question, I have no conception of what actually is in John's brain or in any of your brains. It doesn't give me any information about what you're thinking. And also, of course, look at the size of this person. What is this person going to say? Did you get it? It's like, my first day, I'm smart. Yes, sure, I got it. I am not going to say, no, I have no clue. What are you saying? What is this weird language? So let's not do, did you get it anymore? It's not really a good question. A slightly better question would be, what does this mean? What did I explain to you? What does it mean to you? So for example, in this Dutch context example, I could ask you, what does this mean? I can ask you, what does this mean? Any guessers that aren't Dutch? Koek and ei. But what does it mean? Well, you're supposed to know this. You have some context about words and letters, because koek, it's like cookie. So it should be cookie. You could know that, because it sounds almost the same. Also, en, of course, is just ends, because that's exactly the same. And you remember I told you that ei was egg. So from that also you can deduce that this is about food. So this should also be food. And it's so related to cookie. So, of course, this means cookie and egg. And it also means everything's fine. It's super weird. But in this context, you can see how weird it is that I would only talk about pronunciation and still ask you, what does this mean? But I'm relying on the assumption that cookie and koek are so similar that you can figure it out. And that this is food, so that must mean that is food as well. And in this context, I hope you see how weird that question is. But we do this in explaining programming all the time. We assume, just because you did C# before, of course you will understand how a loop works in Python. We assume that this knowledge that you have from another language easily transfers to a programming language. I came from C# and I went to Python, and then you have a for in Python. Sure, that's a for loop, but there's also a for in a list comprehension, which isn't really the same for. So assuming that people can make that transition from a different language is not really normal, as you see here, or useful, and yet we do this type of programming. Yeah, in programming explanation. Yeah, it's like a variable, it's like an integer, it's like it works in Python. So it's better, but it's still not very good. What is actually going to give me some insight into what you are knowing is asking you to simply pronounce something. So I'm not saying, what does this mean? I'm saying, how would you pronounce this? Oops. Something like this. Another word that has an u in it. So I can just ask you how to pronounce this word. Nothing more, nothing less, no meaning. And that's already getting a little bit better. And if you put that in the context of source code, rather than saying, what does this mean, you could give someone one snippet of source code and say, what does this result in? If you run it, what does this do? If we move on to the programming world a little bit, suppose we have this code, A is 5, A is 7. Asking, in the first level, did you get it? Would just be, what is a variable? Do you know what it means? Asking, what does this mean? Would be, what does this do? And they have to think really well, what does it do? But asking how to pronounce it could be something like print A, and then ask a person, what does it print? See how much easier the question, what does it print is, than the question, what does it mean? Because in my head, I can trace what does it mean. And there's one more thing I want to add that's even easier than just asking someone to pronounce a word or to execute source code, and that is give people multiple options. Multiple choice questions have this sort of bad vibe in education because they're supposed to be easy and you can guess the right answer. But if you really think about multiple choice questions, about the options really well, they're really going to give you some insight. So suppose I want you to pronounce koek en ei. I could say, how do you think you pronounce this? Koek en ei. So I'm writing it down in something that probably makes sense to you. This is option A. And option B could be, well, you could maybe also pronounce it as ook, N-I. So what I'm doing here is I'm picking a second multiple choice option that actually relies on a misconception you might have, because in your beautiful language, sometimes a K in the beginning of a word is not pronounced. So me, as a teacher, I have to realize I know programming. It isn't up to that tiny person to know all these misconceptions. I know Dutch, I know English, I know programming, so I have to think about what you could be confused about. So I can think, well, either you think it's koek and I, or maybe you think it's ook and I. And if you pick this second option, then I have learned something about what's going on in your brain. It's of course not ook and I, because a K is a K wherever it's in the word as far as Dutch people are concerned. But this is helpful. And this, in the same context of programming, you could say, well, what could this result in? Well, it could be 5, it could be 7, it could be 5 and 7. This is a very common misconception. Maybe someone thinks it's not possible at all because the A has already been used, so you can't put a second thing into it. So in this way, I'm really trying to understand what is it that tiny learner has learned, rather than, hey, did you get it? Yes, moving on. So I hope that many of you will stop using, did you get it? Or what does that mean? And start moving towards showing people small snippets of code with realistic different options, so that it's a lot easier for you to understand what people are confused about.
Thank you,
Over to
Felienne.
questions.
Do we have any questions from the panelists?
Yeah. So that sounds like great for one-on-one. How would you do it, for example, if you were presenting to an audience, and do you expect me to change what I do in 5 minutes' time?
That's a good question. So it depends, of course, a little bit. If you're giving a talk at a conference, it's not really a real teaching environment. It's more about inspiring. So if you lose some people here and there, it's probably less worrisome than if you're in a one-on-one. But of course, there are tools like the ones the panelists are using now for gathering the questions. You could also use tools where you have an exercise like this and you have the audience figure out what it means, because if they already don't get this, then it makes no sense to move on to multidimensional arrays.
All right, I have one more question for you. So when you want to practice the skill of teaching, because we are a lot of doers, right? We like to build, and then we're elevated to a senior role. How do you practice being good at that? I think that's one of the most difficult things.
Yeah, it's true. It is one of the most difficult things. So one of the things you can do that is not very difficult and also very enjoyable is practice learning instead of practice teaching. So figure out what you want to learn, maybe a new language like Dutch, which has consistent pronunciation. A language or a craft like knitting or whatever you want to learn, because if you're back in the situation where you are learning, you are really appreciating how tough learning can be. So learn a different programming language or whatever you're interested in. And I think the ways in which you're confused, and not just about the technical stuff, but also that you have this feeling that I guess we all recognize, like, I can never do this. I'm so stupid. I will never learn French or Haskell or something that's out of your reach. So I think that's the best thing. And of course, you can practice teaching, and also you can ask feedback, because even though this is a tiny person, usually they can help you, especially if you use something like this, to tell you what they have and haven't understood. And that's, of course, very good feedback to you, because if I'm 5 weeks into a Dutch course and people are still saying ook here, then it's probably more about me than it is about them. And we haven't addressed that.
And there's one really good way of practicing the teaching side for programming. Answer Stack Overflow questions. You're practicing communication. It can't be overstated how important practicing communication is, and Stack Overflow is great for that too. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Felienne. Round of applause. Thank you. Next up, we have John Skeet. He's going to teach us about time zones. Sorry.
Yeah. So I've thought, okay, I will teach you about something. I'm going to draw 2 graphs and then see whether anyone knows what I'm trying to represent, and then I will genuinely teach you about it.
And while he's drawing, make sure that you go to questions.hw.show if you want to ask.
Is it Tetris?
Well done. Who was that? Yeah, these are time zones. So this is an x-axis of time and a y-axis of UTC offset. And this is an x-axis of time and a y-axis of local time, wall time. Okay, so this might be Europe-Paris, for example. So this is going between UTC +1 and UTC +2. So UTC, not a time zone, but sort of point of reference. And it's worth thinking about time zones in these two ways because they answer different questions. So if you want to say, what is the offset from UTC on January the, what is it today, 19th? Something like that, in Paris, you would come along the x-axis and find, what instant of time am I representing? And, oh, look, it's got an offset of UTC +1. If you want to find out what the current time is at a particular instant, instead of finding out the offset, you can go along this graph to January 19th and find, oh, look, it's January 19th, so it's currently, what's the time at the moment here? Whatever the time is, 11:50.
12:13.
12, sorry, it's 12?
13.
12:13. So it's 1:13 p.m. in Paris at the moment. But with this graph, you can also go backwards. You can say, okay, I will try to find the point in time at which a particular local time happened. So instead of coming up from the x-axis, you're going along from the y-axis. So imagine this is 1:30 in the morning, I think, on a time when Paris skips forward. You would look along and see there is no, this is actually a sort of, this is a gap. So that's skipped. And then you could likewise have going along from here and find, oh, look, there are two times at which a particular local time happened. The instant happens. So this may be confusing now. Hopefully you'll think about it again in the context of that graph. But basically, you can think about time zones in both of these ways. What you cannot think about time zones as are just an offset or just an abbreviation. We are not in the GMT time zone because that's not a time zone. In the summer, we will not be in the BST time zone because that's not a time zone. And if you think BST stands for British Summertime, yeah, that's mostly true, unless you're in 1969 to 1972, in which case it was British Standard Time, where we didn't observe daylight saving time. We were still on UTC +1, but it wasn't daylight saving time. It gets very confusing. The third picture I want to draw is a time zone is a graph, and I'm useless at drawing things. So imagine that's the UK. And in fact, even the UK has several time zone identifiers if you really want to be sort of precise about it. But we can assume we are in Europe, London. And that actually, since the 1960s or something, all of this, so get Northern Ireland, all of this could be considered to be the Europe-London time zone. It is a set of places that will always have the same time on a clock on the wall. That's what a time zone identifies. If you use the Europe-London identifier, you're identifying this region of the world, and you know what time it will be at any instant in time, what the wall clock will say. Okay? So if someone says, what's the time zone? Oh, it's UTC +5. No, that's not a time zone. Yeah, I know at a particular instant what the local time is. I don't know what the time will be 1 minute later. Okay? And unfortunately, there are various RFCs and ISO standards and things. ISO 8601 has 2018-01-19 T 12 13 00 plus and they say that's the time zone designator. It's not designating a time zone, it's designating an offset. So be very aware when someone says GMT, not a time zone. If they say +01 or whatever, not a time zone. A time zone is something that lets you predict the local time forever, until things change. So when you're designing things to work with time zones, most of the time you can think, I've got a time zone ID, I can predict forever. But political systems change. Just 2 or 3 days ago, the time zone data 2018A came out. There are various time zone databases in the world, and Windows has its own one. I use the IANA one, which is where the Europe-London ID comes from. But things get updated as rules change. You know, back in 2005, I think it was, I'm probably wrong, the US rules changed for when daylight saving time would come in. And I want to give you a quick warning, and this is all sort of fairly last minute, as in I'm reading the debates on the time zone mailing list, because there is such a thing. People get very heated about this. But Ireland has, you know, it's an hour earlier in the winter than in the summer. And traditionally it's been as you would expect, where winter is standard time, and then you go an hour forward for daylight saving time. A lot of software depends on that. That software will be broken if it takes 2018A and probably 2018B when that comes out, and shortly after that there will be a 2018C that will fix things again, because Ireland has decided that the summertime is its standard time, and its daylight saving time is to be an offset from its standard time of -1 hour during the winter. So it's not that it's summer and winter time, it's standard time and non-standard time, and you better not assume in your software that non-standard time means an hour later than standard time. That's not been true everywhere for a very long time, but in Ireland in particular, I don't know exactly what will happen, but if you read the actual political laws, it won't be true now. Okay, wow, this is a first. I'm finishing 20 seconds early.
Awesome, we got some good questions too. John, do you have an opinion on standardizing time of if it could work, and what would you like it to look like? Is it even possible?
Okay, so I think time zones are reasonable. I don't want everyone to have to say, 7 o'clock, 07 actually means when the sky's going dark for me. So I'm okay with there being time zones. I would love to get rid of daylight saving time, and I would definitely like to get rid of leap seconds, because almost no one needs them, and they're just painful for most people. So I think it would be entirely reasonable, but would be a massively political difficulty to get rid of daylight saving time. What is feasible, if I'm sure the audience is packed with lawmakers, if you're going to change your laws, please give us some notice. It sounds common sense. Egypt, a couple of years ago, changed, and they gave sort of about 24 hours notice that, oh no, we're not going to have daylight saving time now. It's like, you can't just do that with 24 hours notice. And we were trying to use the most official place we could find that was the Egyptian government's Facebook page. This is not how laws should be made. So yeah, preferably give us about 2 years warning, so that everyone, you know how long it takes for devices and embedded devices to get changed. Otherwise, you get the situation I had with a colleague who was in an airport. I can't remember which airport it was now. But as he walked through the airport, different monitors were showing different times. And when you want to catch a flight, you really want to know what time it is. I don't know whether different airlines thought it was different times at the same time. It's like, so which time zone version are you using, Qantas or whatever? Good question, though.
Do we have any questions from the panelists before we move on? No? Thank you so much, John.
Thank you.
Last but certainly not least, we would like to welcome up Scott Hanselman. Switch to the laptop view, please.
Some of these questions are pretty hilarious. I have to give it to you. You guys have a sense of humor here in London.
John, can you sing a few bars from your favorite musical? Is my favorite one so far.
Oh, but you say that now instead of while I'm there?
Yes. Oh, we have so many great ones. We're going to definitely send them all to you at the end if we can't get to them.
Many of the lines from my favorite musical, you can't really start singing Hamilton on stage because it's a bit profane.
They should turn on the sound.
Can we turn on the sound and the laptop view? Oh, yep.
That's it. All right, cool. So I'm totally unprepared. All the demos will probably fail. I have no idea what I'm talking about. So just lower your expectations right now. Can I start? Is it good?
Can we turn the projector on?
Projector on would be awesome too.
That would be great too. I have to ask this question. I'm sorry. Are we going to have to change the time zone identifiers because of Brexit?
I suspect the time zone rules may change. I don't anticipate any. Potentially, if Scotland decides to use its own, to go different ways time zone wise than England. Yeah, entirely feasible. Be ready for it. I'm sure Brexit will be easy. It's fine.
All right, cool. So I was talking to someone at work who was younger than I am, with no disrespect to young people. They were actually younger than my shoes. And they wanted to know about why Git wanted to know about CRLF. And this isn't mansplaining, this is really old person in computer splaining. And I do it to everyone, so it's non-gendered and it's non-age specific. In fact, one time I had my family over from South Africa and they were really jet lagged. And one of the young people said, gosh, why is it light here and it's dark over there? And I grabbed an orange and I said, all right, you're the sun and then you're the earth. And then I explained the solar system to a bunch of jet-lagged South Africans that were not interested in hearing about that. And then at the end of it, I was like, why did you not find that a fascinating lecture on how the solar system and orbital dynamics work? They said, because you suck. So they said, hey, carriage return line feed. And I said, oh, well, you know what a carriage is? No, I don't know what a carriage is. And I said, oh my God, you should go and check this out. I've got this really cool thing that shows me the Bing homepage, but then when I search for stuff, it uses Google, so you get, so it looks good, and you also find things on the internet, which is nice. So I said, well, carriage return line feed is because the carriage is the top part of the typewriter, and it's really awesome, and you should go and look at a video right now on YouTube with 10,000 views of a carriage returning. And I was like, it's 2018 and we're still arguing about carriage returns and line feeds, and let's go ahead and just watch this carriage, in fact, return. It's a very exciting video. 10,000 views, I just want to point that out. So when you say carriage return and then line feed, that means something. So I went out to the command line and I went to PowerShell and I opened DOS because it's better. And then I went like this, and then I said copy con, because I'm old, sample text file. I don't know how to type when people are watching. I typed ABC, enter, control Z, and I copied the file from the console to local, and then I opened it up in Notepad like this. I think I named it N. And then went like that and said, look, ABC, isn't that interesting? And they're like, no. And I said, look, DIR, and I said, look how sample is actually 5. Look how sample is 5 bytes. What's the deal? And they're like, what do you think those extra things are? And they're like, we don't really know. Will you please stop talking? And I said, it's the carriage return and the line feed. I'm like, isn't that super interesting? And they're like, no. And I said, let's open up Visual Studio and go open file and then go to the desktop, because I'm not going to stop, and then I'm going to hit sample. And instead of hitting open, I'm going to hit the little chevron that no one ever hits because Visual Studio has a really intuitive user interface. And I'm going to hit open with, and I'm going to click binary editor. And I'm going to look in here, and I'm going to say, hey, look, ABC, carriage return, line feed. Isn't that interesting? And then I'm going to go over here, and then I'm going to click down in the corner of Notepad 2, which is one better than Notepad, and I'm going to just double-click on the carriage return line feed little button thing there, and then get frustrated with that tooltip, and notice that I can easily change my carriage return line feeds in there, which is really way easier than VI, and then I could go and run that. And then I said, well, now then you got to start thinking about ASCII and then looking at all the ASCII things and asking yourself why these numbers mean certain things and go and say, like, look, 10, line feed, 13, carriage return, right? 60, whatever, A. Isn't that cool? And then I said, what if you took two typewriters and then plugged them into each other and they spoke ASCII? Then you could do something like this, where you would type and it would print the ASCII on this little piece of tape right here. And then you could go later on and you could take the tape, there's your document, and feed it back into the thing. That guy still has hair, that's good. And then go like this. And now it types your document. That's just taking ASCII and then printing ASCII. And of course you need the carriage return the line feed or it won't return the carriage and then feed the line, which is super, super important. So then, that would be even cooler. Then you could go and take that ASCII information and you could encode it as binary and like whistle high for a 1 and low for a 0, and you could record it to a tape player, right? And then you would play the tape, and that would load the program. So this person is loading Hangman on a VIC-20, on a Commodore VIC-20, because it's like as if we're having a modem conversation and I'm whistling to you, except I whistled into the tape, and then mailed it to you with the Postal Service, and then you received my modem call as a recording and then played it to yourself, which is super awesome. And then what if we could, talk about bulletin boards? And I was like, oh my goodness, we should talk about bulletin boards. And they were like, yeah, but it's 2018. We probably shouldn't talk about bulletin boards. And I was like, no, we should. What if I told you that we added ANSI support for ANSI art from the 80s and 90s in Windows 10 recently? And they were like, hey, that's really great. Linux has had that for 30 years. And I was like, yeah, but Windows also has that now too. So we can do ANSI, which is like more than ASCII. It's got colors and stuff like that, which is really awesome. So then what if I could go out to the command line here and then run a bulletin board system on Windows 10 and then go to Ubuntu and then telnet to localhost as if I was calling the phone and then hit enter. And then I have to change my mode because we're really old. We have to say mode line to turn off local echo. And I say, what is your password? Password. What is your alias? Actually, no, it needs to be, hang on. It needs to be mode. That's not my password. Needs to be mode char. Password is password. Pass atward. There we go. And then I could go and I could do what are called door menus, where it would actually launch out into a DOS game, which would be super amazing. And then we actually shell out to other applications that pick up the call. And then we wait. And I think that younger people don't appreciate how long we waited for the payoff. And also the fact that I'm effectively emulating a DOS board game with 9600 baud slowness, I guess, is super amazing. But what's cool about this is that when you type curl or wget or whatever, and you see weird characters, you don't understand why that's there or why the UTF-8 bomb or byte order mark is there, or you don't understand ASCII. This kind of stuff is why. So while it may be boring to listen to Uncle Scott tell you all about why these things work, there was and is a reason for these things, and I think understanding historical context is good even for people under 20. Thank you.
Any questions from our panelists?
Yeah. Instead of singing the favorite line from a musical, can you emulate what the sound of a tape loading a game would be in your first computer?
I can, actually. I will do that right now.
I mean in person, no video camera. So
No,
like for a Spectrum, it would be...
That's too hard. That's too hard. It doesn't sound like that.
Spectrum did.
Are you a Spectrum person?
Yeah.
There we go.
If an Amiga was your first computer...
No, it's not.
The save icon.
Hey, VIC-20 was. basically like that all the time. It would never stop.
All right, Scott, you are a...
Any
Still
other
going,
questions
by the way.
panelists?
Yeah, I have a question, and sort of a serious question. I'm not sure if that's appropriate. Isn't it our job as programmers to hide these type of details such that people don't have to know them in order to use Git or program?
So I totally hear what you're saying, and I agree. But I was having an interesting conversation with a person on my team recently about the value of learning how to drive a stick shift before you then switch to an automatic car. And then when I did my talk with Alex Ellis on Kubernetes and stuff like that, we talked about leaky abstractions, when it's good to simply let the abstraction go and when it's not. Like Kubernetes is great, but you are a less effective Kubernetes user if you don't understand what a web farm is and how round-robin load balancing goes. The person on my team, though, said that there really are fewer and fewer automatic cars. So we're getting to the point where we will eventually be able to get rid of manual shifts. But that's only because automatic cars have recently gotten to the point where the gas mileage is the same as manual. So there's really no reason. But another question would be, if you're going to have a watch, would you have a digital watch or an automatic watch? If you have a child, would you teach the child how to read a clock? Or would you just say, analog is over, it's all just digital. There's no reason to learn clock hands. There's no reason to learn cursive. I think that historical context, at least a floating window of the last 100 years, has value. So when I teach people how to program, I tend to teach from the metal up. I'll teach them malloc, I'll teach them free, I'll make them suffer. And then I'll be like, oh, garbage collection. But if you start with garbage collection, you tend to make a lot of garbage.
And if you don't know what's come before, you can't avoid making the same mistakes again. Someone will say, oh, this automatic stuff. Imagine if we could just manually change gears, how awesome that would be.
But I think the point is, I think that to Felienne's point, yes, there's value in hiding the abstractions, but I still think that there's I don't know. I remember when I didn't have a pocket supercomputer that I talked to strangers about cats on. This is the sum total of all human knowledge, and I've seen all 3 episodes of Black Mirror that talk about this kind of stuff, and I think if we don't understand history, we are going to get nailed. So I think that Computer Science 101 should be followed by Computer Science History 101. I'm afraid that it isn't. It makes me sad. It's not about old people saying, yeah, remember when I was old. Mm-hmm. I think it's about like, hey, this right here, watching this screen, this is why you should minify your JavaScript. Because, right. That's a great question. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Scott.
Shiny.
All right, we got a couple of questions that we'd like to ask all 4 of you. All right, we'd like an answer from each, if that's all right. And we'll start with this one. I would worry about sounding condescending while explaining things. So how do you avoid this in your life?
I asked them beforehand if they want me to explain it to them.
But then you do anyway, whether they say yes or no.
If they're in their teens, they have to listen to me. But if they are my professional colleagues, and I just say, oh, are you familiar with that? And they go, yes, I take their word for it.
What about you?
I probably screw up. So I just explicitly, consciously try not to be condescending. And hopefully, so while you're talking to someone, whether it's via comments on the internet or in person, and keeping eye contact and try to pick up on verbal cues that you're losing people, whether that's because you're being boring or condescending or whatever it is.
Or both.
Oh yeah, I can be condescending, boring, and wrong all at the same time.
And you still get upvotes.
What do you say, Troy?
I think for me, like I try and do stuff in person because I think you lose a lot of context online. Like online, there's always going to be someone who thinks you're an idiot, no matter how hard you try not to be. Sometimes I try not to be, but yeah, I don't know. I just try and do stuff in person, and I'll speak to people on the phone sometimes as well. There's still phones, by the way. You can still use them. They work well.
Yeah, I think if you're explaining something, a natural state that you get in is sending. If you're preparing a talk, for example, you will be like, oh, what am I going to share? And sharing is fun because you know stuff. So, and it takes a while, I think, to practice. But after a while, you can get in this mode where teaching is more about listening than it is about sharing. And I think then it's easier not to be condescending because you're way more trying to listen to them. A little bit like going back to what I was sharing. not, hey, here's some knowledge, but what do you already know about this? And then I can go a little bit higher, and then I'll be closer, so probably less condescending. But it's very tricky. It's a very good question, because it's so easy to share stuff that people don't care about or already know.
I love what you just said. When I'm trying to teach this stuff, I'll ask them, how would you have done this? Given this problem with carriage returns or ASCII, how would you design it? And then I explain how it was designed, and then they can criticize the design. Because it's okay to have those opinions.
Yeah.
That's great.
It's a good idea.
All right, so for the last one, it's kind of an important one, because now we are globally connected, right? So maybe your team is not in a place where you can be face-to-face. So what is the one thing that each of you do to get a better quality of connection with your team members that are remote?
Well, failing to use Skype for Business, we then fall back on one of the many alternatives to Skype for Business.
Are you done?
That's all I got.
Right, okay. So you should probably ask my colleagues who are out there. But we don't use a Slack channel, but we do use Hangout chat. So people are always available in text form during working times. You know, I don't expect my colleagues to always be there, and you don't need to tell me if you're going shopping or whatever. So you know, have realistic, reasonable expectations that include work-life balance. And be ready to switch to the most appropriate form. So start off with a chat and then say, actually, I could do with some more back and forth without all the tapping. Can we have a VC? And then we'll just hop on a Hangout. And if you're always prepared for that sort of scale of different communications, it helps.
So I want to properly credit this idea to Llewellyn Falco, because he gave it to me. I started doing learning hour with my team, where we take 1 hour of learning every week. One of the team members prepares something that they want to talk about, and the rest learn. And it could be tech stuff, but it could also be how you do calendar management or whatever. And this, for me, has really made my team like closer. They're all like, oh, I want to talk about this, and I want to talk about that. And it equalizes, I think, and also it keeps you in this learning mode, what will also make you a better teacher eventually.
I solved the problem of needing to communicate with team members by getting fired from my job. And I can't recommend it highly enough.
Thank you guys so much for joining us on the Hello World Show Live. Thank you guys for your questions.
Thank you. Yes, you've been an excellent audience. Thank you, London, for being so welcoming. And one more round of applause for our panelists. Thank you very much.